Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about deep learning. Now I'm going to tell you what I mean by that and where I learned about that. But as a quick aside, I did a video once about how I do humor in games, and I said I often embed humor in my games in such a way that the people get it and feel included, but the people who don't get it don't even know there was a joke and they don't feel excluded. So I'm going to rip away the wall for a second here. The way I said deep learning, there are a few people that I used to hang out with at Interplay that right now are going, but most of you are like, I have no idea. Why is that funny? You didn't even know there was a joke. That's the kind of humor I like. Anyway, so let's talk about deep learning. I think that's what the term is. I don't actually know. Like lore drift, it's just a term I've used for years, and I don't really know if it's the correct term. I don't know if I heard it or if that's what I just grew to call it, but that's what I call it. Deep learning refers to something that you've learned, and I'll talk about that. I'm going to put learned in quotes, but you think you decided on it, but you didn't. And let me tell you where I learned about this. When I went to graduate school in 1987, so I was 21. I think I just turned 22 when I got there. And I'm like, I'm into AI. I'm going to do cool stuff with computers. And UCI put me in a dorm room. Well, it's kind of like a townhouse. It was like a 2-bedroom apartment, but it was one on top of each other, and they were stacked, living room, kitchen down here, and the bedrooms upstairs, and then there was a bunch in a row. So they looked like townhouses. They were really just apartments. And I was, my roommate was, which was completely random, was a guy named Larry, he was getting his PhD in neuroscience. And we used to talk all the time because here I was working on a computer, that I knew exactly how that box worked, but I couldn't make it think. Meanwhile, Larry's working with boxes, which were also called mice or rats, that thought, but he had no idea how. So we were approaching the same problem from different directions. And he used to joke that how lucky I was to know how my box worked, because the only tools he had to understand how his box worked were the equivalent to having an ice pick and a sledgehammer. And I thought that was funny because I'm like, I would never figure out how a computer worked if I hadn't been taught it, if all I had was a computer and a sledgehammer. So Larry used to teach me things about deep learning. And deep learning were things that you learned really early, often before you even have a conscious memory. The one thing he said was like, when little children learn letters and words and they learn to identify them, that's an example of deep learning because you learn it at such a fundamental level that you literally cannot turn it off. And I was like, nuh-uh, keep in mind I was 22 years old. And he said, I'll prove it. And he wrote something on a piece of paper and he goes, now look at what I wrote, but I just want you to see it as a symbol, a line, several lines. And he held it up. And of course he had written a word on that piece of paper and I could read the word, but he said, just see it as a bunch of lines. Do not see letters. Do not see the word. And I could not do it. I learned to read at such a young age that I can't undo it. Things form into words. Now, if he had written in a language I didn't know, like if he had written in Chinese, then yeah, I might have seen like a house or a man with a hat on. But somebody who can read Chinese would have seen Chinese words, and they probably couldn't not see it. A perfect example of this, if you had a Nintendo DS and you played Brain Age, there was a game where they would show you words and you had to say what the color of the word was. By the way, I hated this game since I'm colorblind. But now if it was the word tree and it was yellow, it was easy to say yellow. But if the word was the word blue, but it was colored yellow and you had to say yellow, it would pop up and you'd immediately go blue. Oops. And this was voice activated. The game was voice activated, so you had to, and it was timed. So it was how many of these you could do as quickly in like a 30-second period, and how many you got right. So it was both, you had to go fast and you had to be accurate. It was hard to see a word colored one way that was the word for another color, and you had to say the color of the word and not the word. Perfect example of deep learning. And also, it was a little easier for me because a lot of the colors, like when a blue word came up, it just looked like often gray to me. And I would say I would see the word, but then it wasn't colored any differently. And I learned the uncolored ones were blue because the sky often looks gray to me. Anyway, so that's kind of deep learning in a nutshell. But I'm going to tell you something scarier, and then something even scarier, and then bring this whole thing back around to games. So there are some things that you didn't learn. You were born with them. A good example of that is like spiders or snakes. A lot of babies are frightened of spiders and snakes. You show them a picture, you have a rubber spider or snake, they are scared. And that's because an evolutionary biologist would explain it as we evolved where spiders and snakes were dangerous. They could possibly bite you, poison you. It was dangerous. So babies that were scared of them did a little better than babies that would like pick them up and try to stick them in their mouth. So we evolved this trait, which is now built in. It's instinct. It's not learned. Because even babies today in areas that do not have snakes or spiders, countries that are far in the north, those babies are still scared of spiders and snakes. They react the same way as babies that live in areas with spiders and snakes. But that's scary. So here's even something scarier. You've probably heard of uncanny valley. And that's if you made a graph of how realistic the picture of a face was getting and the people's reaction to it. Like down here where it's cartoony, you're like, and then it gets caricature and you're like, and then it gets a little better. Right before it becomes photorealistic, there's this big dip where people are somewhat repulsed, turned off, and a little bit frightened by faces that look almost but not quite photorealistically human. You especially see this in some AI image generation. You see this in games in the 90s and 2000s where they literally couldn't do a photorealistic face. But if you tried to get it too close, you'd be like, ugh. Uncanny Valley is interesting, but the scary part is trying to realize, why do we have Uncanny Valley? Why are we... It's obviously we're programmed that way because it happens to everybody. And it's not like you're walking around seeing close to human faces all the time. Well, evolutionary biology would say there may have been a time in our past where we had to distinguish human faces from non-human faces. And the reason for that is right now we're the only homos on the planet. You hear me, girlfriend? But there used to be other homos. There were Homo Neanderthal, Homo... this were names. I do so bad. There were like the short little guys in the... like the Philippine, Indonesia area. There were these really small humans. These were not Homo sapiens. They were close. Maybe we could interbreed with them. We seem to have some genes from some of them. Maybe there were ones we couldn't. But we probably learned to be able to distinguish them and not want to, do it with them because our genes are what control us and they don't want us to do that. So they built in a little repulsion to, that's not my kind of homo. That's what Uncanny Valley is. And it's built in, even though none of those other humanoids exist anymore. We're it. Did we kill them off? Did they just die out because we outcompeted them? Who knows? But we still have that little bit of, wait, that's not quite human. Maybe they even preyed on us. That's why we're scared. But that's where it gets weird, is that's still built into us. They haven't been around for a long time, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands maybe. But we're still scared of them. Then you move into things for marketing. And I'll talk about how deep learning factors into marketing. You're taught at a very early age that some colors are gendered. Like, guys shouldn't wear pink. How weird is that? Colors have gender? What a completely manufactured thing. We obviously don't think that innately. We aren't evolved to think that pink is feminine. We learn it. And not all cultures agree on that. Fragrances are the same way. I kind of like colognes. I kind of like ones that smell a little floral, and they're always put in the ladies section, and I don't know why. But unisex is starting to become a lot more generic. Anyway, people are taught, well, the floral ones are for women, and like the leather ones are for men. This is stupid. Smells shouldn't have genders. But even better than that is I own a fragrance. I think it's called like Molecule O1. It might be Molecule O2. It smells different to different people. Some people think it smells like sandalwood. Some people think it's kind of musky. Some people think it smells floral. How is that one supposed to be categorized? If it literally smells different to different people, how can you say, well, that's a men's fragrance, that's a women's fragrance? So they do sell it as unisex, but I think that one always strikes me as, wow, that's an interesting fragrance. Food is interesting. You may think, well, food isn't gendered. And you can imagine a silly world where like, hey, skinny food is only, thin-shaped food is only for certain people. So only certain people can eat spaghetti. Only certain people can have a French fry because they're thin. You can have a waffle fry, but you can't have a French fry. That'd be dumb, right? Well, guess what? If you've ever been to Five Guys, they call their smaller size burgers little. Even though the little ones are about a serving size, and the bigger, the ones that is called hamburger, those are really big. They're a lot of calories. You could easily just eat a little one, but they know a lot of men can't bring themselves to order like a little cheeseburger. They just cannot do it. It's ingrained in them not to ever have anything little associated with them. So by a clever little marketing thing, they make you buy more food than you probably want. Maybe even more food than you eat, because it gets you to spend more money. What does this have to do with games? Tim, you've talked for over 10 minutes. What does this have to do with games? So I've talked about people thinking games are bad. And I'm sure there are games out there or game features that you think you've decided that you like, and other ones you think you've decided that you don't like. But maybe no. Maybe you learned to prefer some of those features over others, and you didn't do it consciously. Maybe someone made fun of you for liking a game feature when you were younger, and now you just unconsciously steer away from that. Maybe some of these preferences are innate, like the spider thing. Obsidian's game Grounded, they had to put in an option to kind of reduce how realistic the spiders were, because some people have a genuine phobia of spiders and they can't turn it off. But my guess is a lot of these things aren't innate. They're things you learned. So what I'm trying to tell you is, when you decide not to play a particular game, or because it is a certain genre, or there's a combat type, or it's retro or whatever, and you've just decided you don't like that, you're probably missing out. In fact, I'd say you were definitely missing out. You have to try to look past these things. Just like in that Brain Age game, you had to look past the word and say the color of the word, and try to ignore that it spelled out a different color. Because ultimately, and this is my whole point, if you just decide you're not going to play an entire class of games for some reason, the only person missing out is you. The only person suffering is you. So you may want to go back and look at some games that you dismissed because, oh, they have ugly faces, or, oh, it had turn-based combat, and give it a try. You might find that some of these games you really like. And that was the whole point of this really long video.